So today we're going to talk about medicine, and we're going to talk about home, and how home is my medicine. So many of you don't know that I have spent years in the Black Hills in South Dakota, as well as Santa Fe and New Mexico, and have been apprenticed to Native American elders and storytellers and medicine men. So we use the word medicine a lot. And so before we begin, I want to say that the indigenous and the native, and I'm not native or indigenous, at least not to this country, my people are from the islands. And I will explain that later. But the indigenous view of medicine is not something you find or is prescribed to you and that you take. It is something that you're born with. In some senses, people would say it's your curse, right? And in a sense, it's true. The indigenous view of medicine is that it is an archetypal thing within you. So, for instance, faith is some people's medicine. Some people are full of it, and some people are not. But both of them have the same medicine. That's their thing. It's their medicine. In some ways, it's their curse. Usually, if you have a medicine, it is what you do in your life. Sometimes it goes through generations and generations and generations. And that's why we have this lovely graphic behind us. Thank you, Jim. This is Indonesia. So this is where my medicine starts. Well, actually, it doesn't. My medicine starts generations and generations and generations back, and really started in China. And so my ancestor was the first dragon emperor. Very impressive, right? His first son was called Yao Tang, which is where we get our name Zhao. We just pronounce it wrong because, Dutch. And then, colonial thing. It was him, the dragon emperor, that decided that his firstborn son would not take the throne, the first imperial throne. So he was banished. Where? To Indonesia. He was, in effect, homeless. That is my medicine. It's kind of like being a superhero, except you have a kryptonite. And your kryptonite and your superpower are just flip sides of the same thing. It's your medicine. And so my medicine is getting kicked out of China, going to Indonesia, and finding home. So if you fast forward to the war, which in Indonesia put a damper on the revolution, when the revolution came back, our family, on both sides of my family, were all kicked out of Indonesia. We were, in effect, homeless. We went into Malaysia, and they were parked, my families were parked in camps, and they were patriation camps, what the Dutch called transmigratie. And that means that Sukarno was not committing genocide, he was just pushing us out to places where there was no food or infrastructure or anything. Basically, outside of the border where he was no longer responsible for us. And those of us that were lucky enough to have some sort of connection to the Dutch government through blood or our ability to survive on cabbage and potatoes and carrots in the jungle. I'm not kidding about that, by the way. Brought us to be exiled to the Netherlands, where we were accepted as refugees, but was again homeless. Eventually, many of us, and we were called Indos, which means mixed blood. Most of us were part Dutch, part Chinese, part, some sort of Indonesian, which is like saying you're American. So most of us had some sort of indigenousness, but we had enough Dutch or Dutch connection or military connection to be accepted into the Netherlands. Being accepted into a country is not the same as having a home. And so fairly soon, we found ourselves crammed into ghettos. And one of the things that happened was, it turned out that we natives, we Indos, were highly educated and highly skilled. And so because we worked for less wages, we started displacing Dutch people. And so they decided we needed to leave again. And so in the 1950s and the early 60s, there was something in the United States called the Walters Act, and many, many of us came here. You may not recognize that many of the people in West Michigan, because there was over 50,000 of us, are exiles from Indonesia originally, partially because about 20,000 of them were Dutch people that paid bribes in order to be Indonesians just to get to the United States. So many of the people who live in the Holland area are undocumented aliens who now hate undocumented aliens. Which brings you to me. I myself have found myself homeless many times in my life. And sometimes through faults of my own, and other times through no fault of my own. But it is a pattern in my life to find home and then to unfind home. And so I wanted to talk about the ones and the times that matter to me most. Most of the time when I found myself homeless, it was because I was leaving a bad situation. We call those relationships. And very often it was an adventure, going to somewhere and going away from something. And I was young, and I was up to that. And I also had a certain amount of freedom. I had nothing left to lose. I think what happened was that by the time I had children, I have 7 children, I became different about being homeless, because you're no longer thinking about just yourself and the adventure. And so I worked very hard with my wife, for instance, to make a home for our children. And when her children and my children came together in our home and we had 2 more children, by that time we were renting a place out here on the northeast side, and we were renovating this place. And the idea was we were going to renovate the place, and then we were going to eventually own it. So we put a lot of money and a lot of work into a very old home. And when we were done, the owner came up and said, "This looks amazing. This is great. You guys do really great work. I'm going to bring the guys that destroyed this place back into it, because they're my fraternity brothers, and you need to leave." And so he told us that a few days before Christmas. you need to leave by January 1st. Well, we didn't really have a contract or a lease or any kind of written agreement with him. And we basically, we were working on faith, which is not my particular medicine or superpower. And we were like nearing the January 1st deadline, and by then we had all 7 of our kids under one roof, and this was a large house. And now most of them were older, but we had a baby, a brand new baby, and we had I think Gabe was 5 years old at that time. So we really had 2 that we needed to take care of. And so all of our older kids dispersed, found places. We were essentially homeless. And just before January 1st, a Christmas miracle happened, or actually just after Christmas. A friend who knew a friend that we had known for some time said, "Hey, my mother's house is empty. Would you like to restore this house and then just rent to own this house?" And we said, of course, because we had no other choice. And so we moved into this place. We got there on January 1st, and the first thing that we noticed is that on the 1st of January, the preferred method of the neighborhood to bring in the new year was to fire guns into the air, which explained why the room we were in had 2 broken windows. This house needed a lot of work. Not only did the house need a lot of work, but there were ghosts in the house because for some unknown reason, the woman who lived there left the home and left everything in it. And then her sister next door left the home and brought all of her stuff into this home. And then their daughter moved up to come into this home, died just before coming to this home, and left all of her stuff. So there were 3 people's houses stacked in every room of this house. And all of the appliances, metal, copper, wires had been stripped from the home. So we were no longer homeless. We were no longer houseless. But for the next couple of years, we worked at restoring this home. It was an old home from around the 1920s and was actually a beautiful home. And we were paying to have the taxes paid, and we were paying to make the home beautiful, and we invested a lot of money into it. And one day we woke up to find a thing plastered on the door saying that the city had put a lien on the house and the government as well. You see, this guy who owned the house didn't really own the house. It still belonged to his mother, and he had told his mother that he was going to pay the taxes on this house and had not. And he had disappeared. And we had been doing all of this and put all of this money into it. And suddenly we had to leave because the house was not legally inhabited. All of the paperwork that supposedly had been done had not been done. And we had legal recourse. We could put this guy's mother in jail. That was not an option for us. And so we became homeless. And so we actually lived out of our car simply because we had a dog named Kaya. And while there were people who would put us up or put up with us, a dog was not going to be part of that bargain. And so we floated around and stayed in hotels that accepted dogs and people's homes, had finally landed in the basement of a friend's home who had dogs and loved our dog. And while we didn't have a home, we did have a house. And it was around that time that we started formulating the idea of what home was to us anyway. And that home was not necessarily a place. Home was an idea. It was a medicine. It was a safety. And the opposite of that medicine was homelessness. And it was at that point I realized that my life had been a series of moves. My wife, who is extremely resourceful, and she is, as people say, she's a badass. When I met her, she had a table saw, and she had a scroll saw, and she had a reciprocating saw, and all kinds of power tools, and she knew how to use them. And she's also an artist. She's an illustrator, and she is also a storyteller. But she was the driving force between our ability to restore these homes. And she also was the one who was resourceful and understood that when we moved to another couple's house in their basement, how we ourselves could actually regain the ability to have an actual home. And between our tax returns and luck and a little bit of faith on her part, not mine, we bought a home. We bought an actual home. And so it's where we live today. We don't have any kind of an agreement with anybody. We actually own the home. And the miracle of all of this was that we bought the house for, I won't tell you how much under $50,000 we bought it for, but in the few years that we lived in it, it like quintupled in value. And we don't have any plans to move, and if you saw it today, it's pink, it's stucco, it's full of flowers, it's got gardens everywhere, it's beautiful, and it's a home. It's a home to us and our children, and something else. And this is what I want you to think about. Yesterday, our neighbors, a young couple who just bought the house, they had their first open house. And all their relatives came and walked by and parked on the street. And many of them noticed that my neighborhood is a black neighborhood. And that for a while I was, we were the white couple. So in a black neighborhood, I'm white, and in a white neighborhood, I'm black. And so, but now there was like a truly, a truly white couple and a lovely couple. And they, like many other couples, like the couple that moved in across the street, and all throughout our neighborhood, they were finding their home. And so, I want you to meditate on this, because the medicine of home has a flip side. I would love to say, I am blessed. But what happens when I have to think about the flip side of my medicine? Because in my neighborhood, in order for me to have a home, somebody else had to move out. Now, in most cases, that's just the way things are. I move up to a better house, and we all think about that. I go from this home to the next home to the next home. But not in my neighborhood. Habitat for Humanity built 5 houses in a row, and there will be 5 couples living in those houses. But just one of those houses, the one that was the worst house on that block, the one that they made better, the block that they made better, the couple that moved into that bad house and now have a home, displaced 11 people. The house next door where the couple left and another couple came in. When they were evicted, they were renters. They didn't do anything wrong except a woman who had 6 children gave her sister a place to live, who also had 5 children. And if you do the math, there were 14 people living in that house, and they were evicted. And so while we celebrate a home for this couple, where do the 14 others go? I am blessed. I have a thing, a medicine. And we've talked about this before. The medicine, gratia pleni, grace. I have grace in me. But that grace is nothing without compassion. My ability to have a home also means I need to think about all of those who don't. My wife and I have a nonprofit, and that's our focus this year. He's a young man now who lives next door and was evicted. His family is still homeless. And when he turned 18, this is a cruel fact of the neighborhood, is that his family no longer received food stamps or anything, any kind of aid. And it was time for him to leave because he was sleeping on the couch of a relative. So we took him in. We have 2 people that live with us now who are effectively houseless, but they're not homeless. And while it's only 2 people, I think if every one of us thought about our own abilities, our own blessings, our own privilege, our own who we are and where we live and how we got here, and what we displaced, whether it is an indigenous people or simply the unfairness of how we live in this society. What are we going to do to make our blessings everybody's blessings, to make our freedom everybody's freedom, to make the grace that is our medicine inside of us? How do we activate that grace to become gratitude, and that gratitude turns into the sort of compassion that actually creates passion with other people? And that means to make sure that they are fed, to make sure that they have a home, to make sure that they have the same freedom that we have. Because freedom is not just another word for nothing left to lose. That's the thing that we put on it. So I ask you at the beginning, who wrote this and who sang this? You see, Chris Christopherson, when he wrote Bobby McGee, he was the son of a rich military person, and he himself went to West Point, and he was a Rhodes Scholar. And when he wrote Bobby McGee, he wrote it as an assignment from his Tin Pan Alley boss. But it wasn't until Janis Joplin, who actually was homeless, who actually prostituted herself just to have food, who actually was a meth addict, who actually lived all of the things, who read the words of Bobby McGee. And when she sang it, she gave it meaning, because her medicine was also home. And when she read the words, she was looking for a place. I hope she finds it. She saw herself. And when she sang, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, she felt it. And so, I hope that you all meditate on your home and what it means in whatever way that it strikes you of what I've talked about today. Namaste. Blessings to all of you. Thank you for your attention.